Well, hello everyone. Thank you once again for joining Did You Know, the ESCO HVAC Show. We're hanging out with our very own Jason Upjude. How are you, buddy?
I'm good. How are you, Clifton?
I'm doing great. You know, after last week's show, we were hanging out talking about A3 equipment that was coming to the industry and A3 trainers for our classrooms. And I actually had some emails asking me when we thought we were going to see these new refrigerants out in the industry. And I went, oh boy, that's really where we are out here in no man's land, trying to keep the industry aware of the changes that are happening all around us. You know, those R290 pieces of equipment we were talking about, I ran into my first one back in 2016 in a checkout lane at a Meijer grocery store. So they've been around a good while in some aspect or another, but we have a lot of new refrigerants coming as well. And, you know, yeah, we've got our residential and our light commercial, which is going through some transitions. We'll talk about that. They're going to see a couple different refrigerants. But when we start talking about commercial refrigeration, man, that's a whole nother animal in itself, isn't it, Jason?
It is. Yeah, I was just going to say residentially, upstairs in my kitchen, I've got a R600A refrigerator.
Got one myself.
It's been there for about 5 years.
Yeah, exactly. So nothing new to the industry. So what is new to the industry? Well, that's what we're here to talk about. What is changing? What can we be prepared for? And how soon is it going to get here? Because some of it's here, some of it's going to be here very, very fast. So let's talk a little bit about our refrigerant transitions before we get too deep into what the new refrigerants are. Now, I have added quite a few of these. If any of you out there are ESCO EPA 608 proctors, you'll be familiar with this chart, except it's added in with some additional refrigerants. So I've added in our 454A, B, and C, and I've also added into our 1234Y, F, ZE, and ZS so that we can see these refrigerants in comparison to our previous generations and why we're continuing this lineage. If we step way back, go all the way to the top of the chart, up there in the gray, right? That's where we started this entire refrigerant transition away from our Freon classes, right? So Freon is a wide range of refrigerants that falls into these synthetically made chemicals. When we started on our R12, when we started making our descending changes in chemicals, it was to reduce our ozone depletion, right? So we started with our very high ozone depleting refrigerants. We started knocking those off. We came up with replacements for those. So we went from our CFC refrigerants, and we did have some of our HCFCs at the same time. So we started transitioning. We started walking our way into HFC refrigerants, where we removed the chlorine that was in the refrigerants. Then we were now faced with a global warming due to the fluorine that was in the refrigerants, right? So as we started continuing down our transition of refrigerants, we made some changes. We're now making a lot of changes, okay? And so we need to be aware of what these look like. So we're now moving into a variety of refrigerants. Remember, those refrigerants, or most of those refrigerants that we worked with in the past, were A1 ASHRAE classification. So they were very, very slightly or non-flammable refrigerants. They were non-toxic. So as we move into these new classes of like A2, A2L, and A3, we need to be prepared for where we're going to see those, because they are going to be in some pieces of equipment that look similar to each other, but might be for very different applications. Some may not even be able to be allowed to be installed in the local building codes. So we may see two different classes of refrigerants in a very similar piece of equipment based on your location. Is that some of the things that you hear, Jason?
One of the things that we noticed, like with the previous generations of refrigerants, is that you would see one refrigerant used across 7-8 different applications. We used to use multiple R12 everywhere.
Everything. Cars,
R22 and everything,
freezers,
right?
Coolers, walk-ins, stationaries, Coke dispensers. I mean, you named it.
So we're going to start to see more application-specific type refrigerants, where this refrigerant is used in this application, this refrigerant is used specifically here. We're going to see a lot more of that moving forward.
Exactly. So if you look at this particular chart, and this will be available in our new PowerPoint presentation for 608, which will be coming out in the near future, you'll be able to look at this and go, okay, I have been comfortable working with most of the refrigerants on the upper half of this chart. What is this lower half? Well, this lower half is all of the refrigerants that we are going to see in the refrigeration and air conditioning sector, right? So let's dive into them. Let's see what we've got, and let's break them apart a little bit. So we're going to see definitely our HFOs, very, very popular refrigerants out there. So they're at the very bottom of our scale, very low global warming potential. We're going to see a lot of hydrocarbons. primarily in our smaller equipment. And we'll show you and talk about a lot of what those are here really soon. And we also have some blends that are HFO and HFC blends. Remember, we are on this transition away from HFC refrigerants. It is not a complete phase out like we've seen with CFCs and HCFCs. It is a phase down, but it's a phase down by 85%. And
that's a big chunk.
That's a huge chunk. And it's most of the refrigerants that we already know. So to be able to meet the demand, we're going to have some blended refrigerants out there that will use still some of these HFCs. So they're not completely going away. We're just using less of them in new refrigerants. And they're going to be blended with other like HFOs. So what ones are already available? What ones are coming? That's what we're here to talk about. So Jason, tell us a little bit about the entire S.N.A.P side of EPA.
So if we want to use a refrigerant, if I'm a manufacturer, refrigerant manufacturer, equipment manufacturer, one of the requirements is that it is approved by EPA through the S.N.A.P, the Significant New Alternatives Program. So there has to be an application submitted to S.N.A.P. There's documentation that's required, and then the EPA will evaluate for a very specific application whether or not this refrigerant is an acceptable substitute for that application. As you can see in the slide here, we have a lot of different what they call end uses. These are all just different applications, and you can see the refrigerants that have been approved for those applications. That doesn't mean they can be used everywhere or anywhere, and there are what we call subject to use limitations. So there's going to be charge limitations. It doesn't mean that I can use R290 at 15 pounds or 30 pounds.
It's very specific.
It is very specific, yes. So when we get into what you mentioned earlier, 2L, 2, and 3 refrigerants on the flammability scale, there are going to be charge limitations based on 1, the flammability, and 2, the application. Is it a commercial occupancy, residential? Right.
What's the free airspace around this piece of appliance? Is it in a closet?
These are things that we didn't usually, again, in the past with the A1 refrigerants, with that had RCLs, it wasn't something that concerned us or that we paid much attention to, especially with 410A because it has such a high RCL.
Yeah.
It was something that we didn't really pay attention to, but it is something moving forward that we are going to have to pay a lot of attention to.
Exactly. If you look at the EPA and the refrigerants that they had to work with in the past, they had a fair amount of work to decide what refrigerant is going to be utilized. Now they have a lot of continual work. So we're going to see these new updates. And the current one right now that we're under is called the S.N.A.P 26 proposal. Now, where this is located for anyone that wants to stay up to date with all of these changes in refrigerants, here we go. Grab your phone, grab a shot of our QR, or just take a screenshot and you can come back and grab it later. So this is the direct link over to our EPA Significant New Alternatives program and get you into deeper dive of information. And we can come back and I can actually show you some of that here in a little bit if you're interested. But that's where all of our data comes from. And this is where Jason spends a lot of time working with other organizations to sort through and filter through all of the legalities.
I just want to point out this is S.N.A.P 26. So there's 23, 24, 25, 26. All of these S.N.A.P proposals are based on, again, new refrigerants that we're having to use across a wide variety of applications.
Yeah.
So this is only a proposal. It should be finalized. I believe the comment period is closed and it should be finalized in the next few months.
Exactly.
But S.N.A.P 23 was one of the first ones that approved A2Ls for use. Then there was 24 and 25 and 26. And again,
just expanding on the applications.
Right. And the different refrigerants that are going to be approved in those applications. And there'll probably be a few more within the next year or so, depending on who submits an application to S.N.A.P to say, listen, we need to use this refrigerant in this application.
Sure. So we could see this particular chart added onto, we could potentially see new refrigerants. I'm sure there are a lot of other refrigerants out there being tested, but right now this is our most current. So if it is accepted as is, which is anticipated to happen, these will be the new refrigerants going into new pieces of equipment.
New equipment, correct.
Starting very, very soon. And this is where people get hung up. They think, oh, well, is this going to be alternative refrigerants that we're talking about in a few years, or is this going to be an optional refrigerant? No, this is it. These are the new refrigerants that would be allowed in new pieces of equipment based on these. We're going to break them down, so we'll talk about them a little bit more in depth. Our commercial ice machines, which are remote condenser style. So these are split system commercial ice machines, particularly. Industrial process refrigeration. So that's industrial refrigeration devices. Our cold storage warehouses, ice skating rinks, retail food refrigeration. So a lot of our commercial refrigeration equipment, whether it's standalone or it's grocery store, we're going to go through each of those and show you exactly what that looks like. So a lot happening in the refrigeration side of our industry.
This is all based, again, on GWP.
Yeah.
The global warming potential. And there's a lot of talk about what that is and what limitations are. And there's something called the technology transition rule that limits for new equipment what the GWP of the refrigerant can be. Thank you very much. In that application, you were good on that one. That was good. That was really good.
I've seen where you were going with this one.
So this is just one page of the text, and we anticipate this to be finalized in October 7th to be specific. But what this means is, as if you look at a lot of the dates, January 1, 2025, what that means is a piece of equipment that's going to be put into the market by January 1, 2025 has to operate on a refrigerant that's at the proposed GWP limit or under.
Exactly. Which we're probably going to see this pass as well. That's what we hear on the street.
Yes, there might be some minor modifications to one or two of the dates or one or two of the subsectors, but it's going to look a lot like what you see on the screen. And I want to point out or highlight the residential, light commercial air conditioning and heat pump systems at 700 GWP by January 1, 2025. So folks that are saying, listen, we got time, this isn't coming. Listen, by January 1, 2025, new equipment has to operate on refrigerants that are at 700 GWP or less.
Exactly. So we're talking January 21st, 25 for residential systems. We're talking about January 26 for our VRF systems. So that's a lot to think about. Oh, okay. So Ignacio, thank you for asking. So what's going to happen with 407C? Man, this is exactly why we're here. And I'm so glad you asked that question, because what happens with the refrigerants that we know? All right. So if we have enough, maybe within the next minute or so, shoot in the chat some refrigerants that you work with right now on a regular basis. What are the refrigerants that you are comfortable working with right now? So let's think about that. So we've had like R22 moving away. So we've seen replacements for R22, like 407, 422.
There's 17 EPA SNAP approved substitutes for R22.
Exactly.
17.
There's a lot of things out there. What about like R410? We are comfortable with 410, 404. I mean, there's a lot. 134A. These are all refrigerants that I've grown up with and that I'm very, very comfortable with. What about you? What's the ones that you like? Well, here's the interesting thing. So when we take a look at this, notice I grab my little cylinder running away with the sweat, right? Because there's a lot of refrigerants out there that are sweating bullets right now because they are not going to be able to meet any of these limits. So we have a lot going on in the industry. We can talk about CR2 a little bit if we need to. We can talk about the transition into A2Ls in the residential light commercial. The most important thing to be aware of is that we have things that are happening from different sides of the industry that are going to come together to affect what these refrigerants look like in the equipment. So you could have EPA saying, hey, we're going to say that these are the only refrigerants that can be used. And then we're also going to go, and by the way, we're going to set these limits on equipment. And then you can also have local jurisdictions like we've already seen in California going, yeah, and I think I'm going to be a little bit even tighter than that.
Right.
All right. So we have to be very careful with understanding refrigerants. All right. So
real quick, I want to point out that a lot of the refrigerants that we saw on that previous slide and the refrigerants that are going to meet these GWP limits are not necessarily new refrigerants. No. They might be new to us.
Yeah, exactly.
But they've been on the market, like 1234YF has been in cars forever.
I've got a 2016 Ram. Right. It's in it. Yeah. 2012 was the first Cadillac that we've seen with it here.
In 2015, we saw R32, which is an A2L.
Absolutely.
In window units. We've seen 290 and 600A, which are highly flammable A3s in residential refrigerators and freezers and commercial applications reaching coolers and freezers. So just because they're new to us doesn't mean they're new to the industry. And propane goes way back to the 30s and 20s. Yes,
yeah, absolutely. 100 years, well over 100 years for R290 propane that we know, right? Propane was one of the reasons we came up with chlorofluorocarbons is because we were looking for a non-flammable, non-toxic refrigerant, right? So we did. We came up with CFCs.
So these aren't new.
Flammables. No.
A lot of them.
And if we want to talk a little bit about the blends on these, like the 454s, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. We'll come back to that, because even a lot of these numbers that you're not familiar with right now are blends of some of these other numbers, like R32 and 1234YF.
A lot of them, yes.
Yeah, so we'll talk about those a little bit to give you a better understanding. So what does that mean? I know no one hopped in there on the chat. I feel heartbroken.
410A and 407C were the two that got picked on the most there, yeah.
Exactly. So let's take a look real quick while we're here. Now, if you want to learn more about all of our A2Ls and the low GWPs and exactly what this looks like and the safety procedures, you need to head on over to Jason's low GWP training program, right? All available on escogroup.org. It's on our e-learning network. And I'll see if I can grab a link to that one again here in a little bit too. Oh, you know what? I think I actually have one because we talked about it last week. Yeah. So if you're interested in diving deeper into low GWP refrigerants, whether they're A2Ls or A3s, we've got the deep diving resources for you to get better familiar with these.
If you haven't started, you should start now.
Yeah. Well, we were talking about this before the show started. I feel like we're halfway down this slippery slope, and the majority of our industry is up at the top going, what are you doing down there?
Something going on over there.
And so we really have a lot to catch up with in our industry. So what refrigerants are going to be going away, whether they get caught by the new refrigerants and equipment or they get caught by the reduced GWP in equipment? It's going to be pretty much everything you're already comfortable with, right? And when we look at just the global warming potential of these refrigerants, we're going to see very high GWPs. Remember, when we went away from R22, we reduced our ozone depleting potential. That was the goal, but we actually went up in global warming potential. So now we are battling global warming potential in our refrigerants. So everything that you work with now, whether you're in light commercial, whether you're in residential, you're in industrial, you're in refrigeration, you're going to see your most popular friends going away in a very, very, very quick period.
Before you skip to this, I just want to throw this out there. So we're looking at the GWP numbers on these cylinders. Let's take, for example, 410A. It says it has a GWP of 2090.
Yeah, what does that mean?
What does that mean?
Yeah.
And what that means is if 410A were to be vented to the atmosphere, that means it can trap 2,090 times more heat than CO2 by itself. So CO2 has a GWP of 1.
Right.
So 410A, when released in the same amount as CO2, can trap 2,090 times as much heat over a 100-year time period, than CO2 by itself.
Wow.
So if you look at those numbers, 404A, 3,920. I mean,
that's huge.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that is our primary low temp refrigerant in refrigeration systems, right? If we get into commercial refrigeration, we primarily right now are using 134A for medium temp and 404 for low temp. Both of those are going away very rapidly.
In some states, they've already gone.
They're already gone.
There's some local jurisdictions that said, listen, get this stuff out of here. We don't want to sell it here no more. I'm not going to mention any names and make anyone mad, but there are some states.
Limited liability.
Yes. They said, listen, we're done with this. Move on.
Yeah. Move on to something new. So if you're already working with 410A, 404A, 134A, 422B, Ignacio, there's that 407C and 458A. So those last three are just R22 replacements, all on that chopping block, which we don't really see in new equipment anyhow. They're more of a service gas, but just to be aware of how they line up with the rest of these refrigerants, right? These higher
down is going to affect these refrigerants just because of their GWP.
So let's talk about that phase down a little
Wow, you're right on
it. All right. So what is this phase down? We keep preaching this phase down. Well, the phase down means that we have already started the reduction of the amount of HFC refrigerant. Did anybody
who said that? We've already started. A lot of people say, when is this going to start or when is this going to happen?
I hear it all the time.
It started last year, January 1 of last year.
Anyone in the crowd see the prices of R410A, R404, R134A? Did you see the prices of any of those go up this last year by chance? Just out of curiosity. And I see it on forums all the time. And every once in a while I'll hop in and I'll put a reply and people will just treat me like I'm some maniac that I'm just coming up with this stuff out of my ear. But this is the truth. So last year we started a 10%, January 1st of 2022, we started a 10% reduction down our slide, which means if we made 1 million pounds of a HFC refrigerant in 2021, we made 900,000 pounds of it the following 2022. So what's that do for if our demand, so let's think about basic economics. If our demand goes up and our production goes down, what's going to happen to the price?
We're stuck.
All right. It's going to increase. So for anyone that questions why the price of refrigerants went up in 2022 more than any other year, here's the slippery slope that we began. Here's the interesting thing, and make sure you pay attention to this. January 1st, 2024, we're going to add an additional 3 times that. 30%, an additional 30% reduction. We've already came down 10. We're now going to step down to a 40% reduction in the amount of HFCs that are newly manufactured. So that is going to be a huge driving force on the cost of refrigerants, which is in turn causing our manufacturers to utilize these new refrigerants, sometimes maybe ahead of schedule, just because of the prices of refrigerants. So when we say these are our deadlines, when S.N.A.P 26 is approved, which is probably going to, and our equipment GWP is approved, we're not going to start then. We're going to start before then so that we're prepared for when we get there, right? So this equipment is going to be out and be ready when those
before those dates come. Before you get off the slide, I want to kind of explain how this how the AIM Act here works. The AIM Act was passed by Congress, signed by the president. So it's not going to go away.
Not going away for the naysayers.
But it's not
the
just
next president's not going to remove it.
Right. It's not just an overall reduction of all HFCs. It works like a bank account where there's an allotment every year.
Okay.
And if I'm like a wallet, let's say a bank account.
That's right.
If I'm a refrigerant manufacturer and I get my allotment from the government, the EPA, it says
get my little chunk.
I can make 1 million pounds.
Based on pounds or?
Based on carbon emissions, based on the GWP. So me as the manufacturer, I get to decide what I'm going to make, but each tank of refrigerant I make is going to draw from those credits. It's going to deduct from my bank account. So if I'm a manufacturer and I want to make enough refrigerant to sell all year, I'm going to probably pick and choose the lower GWP ones.
So I can make more tanks of it.
More tanks of it, correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
So some manufacturers are just going to look at them high ones. I don't want to point fingers, but let's say 4048, 3,920. That's a big chunk. All right, that's a big withdrawal from my allotment.
What if it's an HFO at like 7?
Right. Or R32 at 676.
Exactly.
So
3.5. Yeah, 3.25. Yeah.
This is going to affect some refrigerants more than others.
Exactly.
Based on, again, the manufacturer and based on the GWP of the refrigerant. So when you ask what's going to happen to, say, 407C, well, it does have a pretty high GWP. Some people will still make it. We'll see it reduced.
Right.
Again, because of its high GWP. But we're going to see the higher GWP refrigerants affected the most.
The soonest.
It's based on credits or allotments that the EPA hands out to the manufacturers, and each tank pulls from that allotment. And once they've reached their limit, they're done for the year on the carbon emissions.
Wow. So when we think about how this is affecting us and we go, oh, this is just an industry, this is just the government. Well, everyone is being affected by this. Remember, this is all based on international treaties, not just local jurisdictions. We talk about the Kigali Amendment. That was an amendment to the Montreal Protocol. It was an international treaty to reduce our effect to the world that we live on with the refrigerants that we use in air conditioning, refrigeration, foam blowing, aerosols, a variety of different things.
Europe's F-gas regulations are the same. They're very in line with us. Yes. So we're not the only ones doing it.
No, we just need to understand it and understand how it affects us. So yes, big changes in all of those HFC refrigerants. And a big reason that we're here to do this is to help understand. If we're not educated, we end up having byproducts of a lack of education. One of the studies that we did, it's been a few years ago, but one of the studies that we did looked at replacement parts for equipment, just to go, okay, how does education affect replacement parts? And we looked at the entire spectrum of the HVAC industry. And what we found was if we look at residential markets, about 82% of the parts coming back under warranty from the field, from technicians, about 82% showed no fault found. That's a lot of misdiagnosed parts, right?
That's
like,
extreme.
Pretty extreme. Like commercial, 68%, industrial, 28%. But even like on chillers, that was very low, only 10%. And we went, well, why? Well, it's because of education. The larger equipment you get, the more complicated it is. Typically, we get into higher expectations of education. So it's proven that education can reduce your warranty parts returns. It can reduce callbacks on the actual jobs. So we're here to help identify ways to make you more efficient and to reduce some of these problems that we have. Thanks for joining us, Howard. Glad to see you out here. All right. So what refrigerants will we, or I should say may, because it's not finalized yet. It should be finalized.
Most likely, right?
Most likely. So what refrigerants will we most likely see? All right. So let's look at our different categories, and wherever you fit in here, this will resonate with you. So if we look at our commercial ice machines, particularly our split or remote condenser ice machines, right? Currently, you're probably using R404. And that's it, right?
Okay. Unless you live in one of the aforementioned states, they'll go nameless right now.
That's true. That's true. And then you're really having some issues. So when we look at S.N.A.P 26 and what refrigerants will be acceptable for use in new equipment, we're going to have a variety. So
I'm going to stress that, Clifton, that this is for new equipment. This is not for retrofit.
Not replacement. We'll do that on an entirely different show. We've actually talked a little bit with Chemours. We had Jeff Werther and Don Gillis talking about some of the replacements, especially for commercial refrigeration. And we'll dive into that a little bit later. So today we're really talking about OEM equipment, new OEM equipment, and what refrigerants will be in it. We don't want it to be a surprise. I mean, I already get this from technicians that walk up to a R290 ice machine and go, what's all this red stuff? And why has it got a big flammable label?
There's stickers all over it.
Well, I've not seen this before. Well, that's why we're here. Remember, this is all, we keep saying a village, and I've been told that it's more like a community. We've grown so much. So we're here as a community to talk about this stuff openly, right? So that it's not a surprise. So what can you see in a brand new ice machine besides R404? Remember, these are not potential refrigerants. These are the only refrigerants. Okay.
They're going to meet that GWP limit that we saw on the technology transition rule from the EPA and approved by S.N.A.P for use in this application. So those are two of the criteria right there.
Exactly. So we're going to see some things like R32. We're going to talk about R32 in residential and light commercial air conditioning systems. We're going to talk about them in window units, PTAC units. We'll dive into that a little bit later here. So it is a very good refrigerant for those of you that are not aware, because there may be some out here that are not aware. R410A, that refrigerant that we're so comfortable with in air conditioning applications, half of it is R32 already, right? We probably, if we would have been as prepared for mildly flammable refrigerants 20 years ago as we are today, we would have went with R32 instead of R410A.
Right. When we were switching from 22 to 410, the rest of the world was switching from 22 to say 32. Our building codes, our applications weren't such that we were allowing for flammable. So all we did was take 32 and add some flame suppressant in it until it got an R125, and it became an A1 refrigerant, and 410A was born.
Everybody was happy, except for the global warming people, which is now
I guess 125 is pretty bad, right?
Very, very high. Tom, thanks for joining in on us. We appreciate that. So that R32 is going to be an acceptable refrigerant. So we may see R32 in residential light commercial air conditioning, as well as our split system commercial ice machines.
It's also part of the blends of some of those refrigerants seen on screen as well. It does have a low GWP of 676, so
it's a good refrigerant. It is mildly flammable, and we'll dive into that. We're actually going to it's a surprise. I won't even talk about what we're going to do so we got 1234YF as well. So 1234YF is our HFO refrigerant. Remember, our HFO refrigerants are very synthetically modified HFCs. They still have hydrogen, fluorine, and carbon, but they now have a very unique bond of the carbon.
It's a double carbon bond. So an HFO is an HFC with a double carbon bond.
Exactly.
If you want to simplify it, right.
Much easier if it is released. That's where the low global warming comes from. So very popular. Most of our vehicles are using 1234YF right now, right? Single constituent refrigerant. Now, we will see some blends, like our So everyone has, oh man, what's the difference between R32 and 454? Well, R32 is a single constituent refrigerant on its own, right? If we take that R32 and we want to reduce the global warming potential of it, we just blend it with some 1234YF. And in different blends, different concentrations, we get R454A, B, and C, right? So they will work with different refrigeration applications, different coil temperatures, really what it kind of comes down to, and system performance. So we're going to have different blends in there. So the more you get comfortable with low GWPs, especially around R32 and 454 and 1234YF, you're going to be comfortable with pretty much any blend that comes along the way, because those are going to be our primary refrigerants that we're going to work with, right? So then we have things like R455, we have 457 and 516. I did not have these in the chart because 6 months ago when I was putting that whole chart together, there wasn't anything even talked about. So these are refrigerants that have popped up that are now going to be on the acceptable list that I will add into that chart so we can compare those. But still, we're talking about blended refrigerants, right? We're still talking about adding in 1234YF or R32 or 125, 152. We're talking about blended refrigerants, right?
So any of the 400s or 500s are going to be a blend. Your 400s are your zeotropic or near azeotropic, and your 500s are your azeotropic. So
exactly. People always ask, well, why do we flip a can of R410 upside down when we're introducing it into a system? Well, because it's a blended refrigerant. It has two, R32 and R125.
Any of the 400s should be charged as a liquid throttled in, and then 500s not necessarily. But the 400s for sure have to be throttled in as a liquid.
Exactly. So nothing new. We just have more blended refrigerants that we need to be aware of. So don't be surprised when we get that new piece of ice machine in January 2025. And we talk about this like it's years away. It's not. It's like a year and a half, right?
So and like you said, they're going to hit the market before. It's not like come January 1, 2025, all of this new stuff is going to be unleashed.
Exactly.
We're going to see it roll out long before then.
Oh, absolutely. Those R32 that we're talking about right here, I'm going to show you some examples here in a little bit of ones that are already out in the field, and R290 as well. So they're not new. We're actually looking forward to showing you. And Tom, thanks for letting us know that you're joining in from San Francisco. Everyone else that's out there, let us know where you're chiming in from. We always want to know how big our community has grown to. There's been times it's just me and Jason hanging around, and a person or two out there going, "Hey, how's it going, guys?" And we're starting to turn into just a fun group of people who are all anxious to learn professionally about the changes that are happening in our industry. Hey, chillers, any chiller people out there? I actually didn't work on a lot of chillers when I was out in the field. Not my specialty. I was around a lot and I taught principles of them, but I didn't actually put my hands on too many chillers. But even with chillers, there's only a couple different refrigerants out there, right? Well, our chiller folks are getting ready to see the exact same kinds of things. So our new acceptable refrigerants that we're going to see out of all of this, our low GWP refrigerants, if you're not already working with things like ammonia or CO2, which is a different class, they've been around for a long time already. They're not new refrigerants. They've been around. We're talking about some new refrigerants going into these systems. We're back to talking about R32. We're back to talking about 1234YF. We're now actually going to add in an additional one, which is that 1234ZE, right? It's another one of our HFO refrigerants that is going to be utilized in a lot of these lower temperature and sometimes lower pressure applications. Jim, thanks for joining in with us today. And if you have any questions, don't be afraid to ask them. That's what we're here for. I have people all the time go, "Hey, how long does it take to build the script for those shows?" Script? We just let it roll off our tongue so we can actually talk about things that are real and the things that people want to talk about. So if you have any questions along the way, hop in here and let's dive a little bit deeper into them. So our chillers are going to see a similar amount of refrigerants, all right? They're going to see some optional refrigerants out there, all based on these low GWP expectations. So it's not just the residential folks. I mean, we get a lot of pushback from the residential. "Oh, we don't want any of that flammable stuff. We're just going to stick with R410A. No, you're not. And it's not what I consider flammable. A3 is what I consider a flammable refrigerant, which is a highly flammable refrigerant.
Right. Mildly flammable, highly flammable, 2L and
big
A3.
Difference. Big difference between our mildly and our highly flammable stuff. And people will talk about that all the time going, "I don't want to deal with highly flammable stuff." How many pounds of an A3 refrigerant do you have sitting underneath of your seat in your van, right?
Right.
Gasoline is an A3 refrigerant that we used back before we went to the CFCs as well. So
how many people have a 30-pound tank of propane sitting under a grill that they're going to set on fire to cook over.
Yeah, inches away from each other.
Yeah.
Exactly. All right, so now let's take a look at our cold storage warehouses. So when we talk about cold storage, we are typically talking about 404 style systems. We might have a 134 out there. I've seen some 134A refrigeration walk-ins, but a lot of times we're going to be working with R404 in these systems. So the replacements that we're going to see, since a lot of these are a lower temperature application, we're not seeing R32, right? R32 is our medium temperature, high pressure refrigerant. We're probably not going to be seeing that one. If it is, it's going to be an update down the road. So our R32 has not met this list, at least for our S.N.A.P 26 proposal. We're going to see 1234YF. We're going to see 454A. We're not going to see B. Remember that B is another medium temperature application, medium pressure application. So we are going to see 454A and 454C utilized in this process, though. And we've got our 1234ZE, which means now we've got some additional blends in there with that 455 and our 457 and 516. So very common refrigerants that we'll see in new equipment for our cold storage warehouse. All right, what about our ice skating rinks? Anyone out there work on ice skating rinks? Right? You're probably a 134A. You might be a 404. It depends on the system that you're actually working with.
There's another one that I want to point out that's probably currently out there that is low GWP, and it's ammonia.
Oh, absolutely.
A lot of people don't realize when we think ammonia, we think, oh, it's toxic. All right. But it is also a 2L refrigerant. It is also mildly flammable. Right. The big thing there is the hazard that becomes acute first is the toxicity, but it is a 2L refrigerant.
Exactly. Good point, Jason. Glad you brought that up. So our most common replacements that we're going to see now going into new equipment for these are going to be, we have our 1234YF, our 1234ZE, and we also still see some of that 454C, 455A, 457A, and the 516. So still a little variety depending on what the manufacturer is going to design their system for and I'm sure, the cost of refrigerant at the time of manufacturing. It's going to be a big deciding factor for these manufacturers.
Availability as well, right?
Yeah. If I've got 1,000 pounds of refrigerant in this system, what should I design it for?
Right. These are large systems. So.
Exactly. Should I design it for a high global warming potential refrigerant that's probably not going to cost a little bit of money? It's going to cost a ton of money. Or am I going to focus on a lower GWP refrigerant that's readily available and is going to be available for a longer time, but may take some different equipment components to be able to function properly?
As a manufacturer, I have to look at once this unit is in the wild, I'm going to have to expect the technician, the contractor, the installer. It's got to
get serviced.
Right. To be able to charge this thing. Yeah. For the life of the system. I'm not going to base it off a refrigerant I know that is going to be reduced over the next so many years by 85%. So as a manufacturer, as a contractor, I have to think when I buy this unit, I'm going to have to service, especially something like this, for the next 20, 30 years. I'm going to want to use a refrigerant that I know is going to be around for a little bit anyway.
Exactly. Absolutely. So a lot of big changes happening there. This is one that is really going to capture some people by surprise, I think, personally, just because I spent quite a bit of time out in this field. When we start talking about food storage, so commercial retail food, vending machines, we're also talking about, reach-ins that are going to be in our kitchens, our prep areas. In the past, we've typically worked with, originally we had 22. A long time ago, we had 12. We ended up moving into things like 134 and 404A. Well, we're really going to have two different classes of equipment based on the application and the installation area and your local building codes. So if we talk about equipment that falls into like that A2L classification, right? We can utilize refrigerants like 1234YF. We could talk about 454C. We've still got that 1234ZE as a candidate. And then we got our 455, our 457, and our 516A. But we also have the ability to have a similar cabinet, completely different refrigerant, right? We have the ability to now build a piece of equipment, same construction, maybe different application, and utilize R290. So it will be based on the construction of the equipment and how it's allowed to be installed.
That's one of the things that S.N.A.P 26 did was allow for a larger charge in specific applications of R290. Right. We were used to seeing 150 grams, and now we're looking at, say, 300 and 500 grams for, depending on if it's open or closed system. closed being doors and drawers, and open being something where you can reach in and grab the product and pull it out. But S.N.A.P 26 did approve for larger charges. So we're going to see this expand into other areas where we may not have seen it before.
That's the reason I say, and the reason I had that little pause in there, I was trying to figure out how to approach this politely and professionally. If you're a refrigeration technician and you're currently not working on R290, you need to be educating yourself now. Like
it's coming
right now.
It's coming.
Because if you have not encountered it in the field, you're going to probably this season, right? And we'll talk about all the different equipment that is utilizing R290 now. So this is going to be, refrigerants for newly manufactured equipment. But that doesn't mean that's not already out there. That just means that all new equipment is going to have either A2L or it's going to be an A3 design, right? In these applications.
And remember, there's a big difference there. A2Ls are mildly or slightly flammable, and A3s are highly flammable.
Highly flammable. That means you're not going to be using the same manifold gauges working. You could have two pieces of equipment.
That's what I was getting at, Clifton.
One manufacturer. Exactly. They could look identical to each other. They could be two sets of doors and drawers coming out of the factory that are completely different refrigerants. That's going to take a different skill set and is going to take different tools to work on those two pieces of equipment.
There are some locations that say, listen, if you're working on this A3 highly flammable refrigerant, you can't do it here.
Exactly.
The building code says, listen, you got to come pick it up in your truck, take it outside,
wherever,
fix it, and then bring it back. But you can't work on it in this location, in this building occupancy, or this classification of it's a commercial kitchen. There's open flames. There's a flat top grill. And again, that varies by location, geographic, what building codes are locally. There are a lot of places that say, listen, you can't service it in place. Come pick it up, put it in your truck, take it away, fix it, and bring it back.
Exactly. So these are things that we need to be aware of. We don't want you to get to that job and you show up and you go, okay, I got me an R290 two-door reach-in cooler. I think I'll start tearing into this thing right now. And you got a hibachi grill 3 feet away from it. And you look over and you go, guess I'm not. Right? Maybe the owner wasn't even aware of this when they bought the equipment. Hopefully they were sold the...
There's stickers everywhere on these things. Yeah.
Yeah, I know, Tom. That's why I wanted to bring this up, and I was trying to figure out how to be polite about this, is that it can absolutely change. I try to be careful about it because we're already short on manpower, right? What happens if we show up to a job, we've got 5 jobs scheduled for the day, and we show up to one, and it's an R290 unit in a kitchen that cannot be repaired there, and they don't want me working on it in the parking lot, and I got to take it back to the shop. 5 jobs just turned into probably 2, 3 of the tops, right? So these are things to be aware of going into it. Hopefully, we can start having our dispatch ask, do you know, is it an R290 piece of equipment? How old is it? Is it less than 6 years old? Do you mind checking to see what refrigerant is in that for me?
Yeah, there's stickers all over this thing, so you should be able to tell right away. Right.
Exactly.
The other thing I'll point out is that there are some manufacturers right now, we saw it at the HR Expo, for package units like this where they're 290, you slide the entire unit out. The line sets are like plug and play, and you slide the new unit right in, and then you take that unit back to the shop and service it. It's more of a slide out, slide in, so you don't have to service it in place. You can just replace the entirety of the package system there and just plug the harnesses in. So there is technology coming out to help us without having
more efficient.
Right, we got to get a big box truck. We got to pack up this cooler, drive it all the way back to the shop. Right. So technology is advancing. We're not standing still.
Yeah. And there's a lot of this happening around us. That's why we're here, right? We're not here to preach. I mean, we don't manufacture equipment. We don't manufacture refrigerant. We manufacture education. That's it.
If we pass it on to you,
that is all we do. We have came from the field. We've came from the business side. We've all got experience in the industry, and we're all here joining together to make sure that you're successful. And in industry, we are successful. That's it. That's what it comes down to. Yeah, this is a little familiar to me, right? If you're a grocery store technician, you're used to seeing some refrigeration racks. Well, things are going to change a little bit for you as well when we start talking about new installations. We've already seen like CO2 systems out there, but we're also going to see new equipment utilizing 1234YF remote condenser systems. 1234YF, we will still see that 454A, 454C, 1234ZE, right? So we're seeing a variety of refrigerants that could be used in these applications by the manufacturers. So your 404 is going away. And these are going to be some of the replacements that you see for that. And like I said, very short period of time. We're not talking about 10 years down the road. We're talking within the next year, year and a half. What about our commercial ice machine guys, right? I was a Manitowoc distributor. I had a bunch of them that I did as lease units, all 404 units, except for my older guys. I had some 512 out there from like dinosaurs, but that was 25 years ago.
Don't say that. Don't give away your age.
I know. Why do I do this? Well, I've learned a little over the years. I got to see a transition of refrigerants. I got to see CFCs go away. I got to see HCFCs. I worked on old junk when I got in the industry, right? So I got to witness this before, and we're just going through it again. That's all. This transition is not something that we're unprepared for. We're just ill-prepared for. So we just need to be aware. So what we are going to see in our packaged ice machines, commercial ice machines. So this is what most of you see. This is every bar. This is every hotel. This is every fast food, this restaurant, gas station. This is every packaged ice machine that you have seen. It's either going to be remote with a A2L or it's going to be an A3 packaged, right? We've already seen them. Our very own Dennis Sukup has Sunrise Refrigeration out in Las Vegas, Nevada. I just talked to him a couple months ago. It's like, I just got out of an R290 training class and my new ice machines coming in are going to be R290. I'm like, wow, that happened a little faster than I expected. He said, yeah, like my next order, I get R290 ice machines. I'm like, oh, okay. That's how fast it is. So they're already out there. This is not coming in a year and a half. They're already sitting out there waiting for you to approach them and go.
And again, this is the larger charge we were talking about.
Yeah, and I've got that in here too.
It's going to be more than 150 grams.
Right. So now we can make bigger machines. And I'll even show you some of the bigger machines that I'm talking about. We're not talking about little bitty under counter, 30-pound a day units. I mean, we're talking about some pretty significant pieces of machinery. So R290 is going to be the dominant refrigerant in these packaged commercial ice machines. What about our reach-ins? Doors and drawers, right? So R290 is becoming a very prominent refrigerant already. We're seeing a lot of it out there in the field. So if you're a technician that's used to working on R404 and 134A, and you walk up to an R290 unit, you're like, what is that? Hey, Tom, we got to get you on here sometime.
For real.
You are always right on top of it, and you've got the best stuff. I mean, you're the reason we do this. Because we're just trying to bring this industry together, talking about these things. 5 years ago, it has first R290 freezer. That says a lot, right? So with these
it's not new.
No, that's the whole thing, is it's not new. I've actually been talking to one of our tool manufacturers to do a live demonstration at the National HVACR Education Conference this next year to show us how to properly work with our A3 tools. And so you get a chance, hop on over there, take a look at that, and get registered, because a lot of these manufacturers will be here to help walk through some of these best practices if you're not already comfortable with it. We'll do some, but I would rather do the actual hands-on training with the manufacturers of the tools or of the equipment, just to make sure you're getting firsthand information on that stuff. All right?
So to point out on this particular slide, 290 is not new to this application. What we're saying here is you're going to see it in a larger charge.
Yeah, absolutely. And all your new pieces of equipment, it's either going to be the A2L with that group of refrigerant, or it's going to be an A3 with pretty much just 290. So now it comes back to our residential light commercial. Our people who have been naysaying and complaining the most about this transition. I know, you're my people too. I was refrigeration and HVAC. I spent a lot of time in 22 and 410 and myself. So you're going to see two primary refrigerants. That's it. R32, which we've talked about a lot for some of these other commercial applications, and 454B, which is a blend of R32 and 1234YF, right? So once you become comfortable with one or the other, the refrigerant pressures are not significantly different. Maybe we should do that.
Identical, yeah.
Maybe
They're
we should actually
very
do a class on that sometime to show what those refrigerant pressures look like on a PT chart, right? We're not seeing a lot of the equipment out there in the residential split system market. We're getting there. We're seeing, like the Daikin Altherma split system. That's an R32 split, mini split, 1-to-1 unit though. So we're not seeing a ton, but we're going to. And said, and if that passes January 21st, 25, you're just going to see everything. So, so that's what we're going to be prepared for.
These two refrigerants for that application where we're 700 DWP or less.
Right.
Some of the manufacturers are choosing 32 and some are choosing 454B.
That's right. So as long as you learn best practices for low GWP refrigerants, you're covered for both of them, right? So that's the important part, is just to be prepared for whichever one. Now, what if we're talking about window units, PTAC units, right? Same scenario. We're going to be using the same refrigerants. So our commercial refrigeration folks, they're going to be all over the board, depending on where it's installed and what temperature, what application,
what building classification.
What's my evaporator temperature? Is this for a floral cooler? Is this for a dehumidification application? There's going to be a variety of different applications in refrigerants where we talk about what we currently are comfortable with on air conditioning is really just going to be 32 or 454. That's about it.
I'm going to point out that 32 was approved for use in window units like we see here on the screen in 2015.
That's a great point. They have been out there for a while. I used to see them in the Johnstone catalogs all the time. I did a class up in Washington, D.C. earlier this year for Johnstone Supply, and I pulled up one of their SKUs for a part number of a R32 unit that they had in stock. And everyone went, "At our Johnstones?" I'm like, "Yeah, they're in your DCs." They have been for a while.
So if you walk into your appliance store or your home improvement store where they sell these, you see pallets of window units stacked up, 90% of those are going to be R32. Yep.
Oh my gosh, Jason. I love when we do these shows together, man. It's like the symmetry is just unbelievable. So this is me walking through Costco about 3 weeks ago. All right. So this is a window unit. Have you noticed any changes to it?
It does look different.
It does, because we have now isolated the evaporator and the condenser. So our window is going to slide down in between the unit. What does that do? It isolates our refrigerant network. Where's most of our refrigerant at? Outdoor, right? Indoor is hopefully primarily vapor, right? So as we're boiling off in our evaporator, we should be, having a majority of our refrigerant outdoors, right? Not as much on our indoor unit.
Again, these are smaller charge package window units.
Every one, except for one little bitty portable dehumidifier, every window unit that they had in portable air conditioner at Costco here in Avon, Indiana, every one of them was already R32.
Yep.
So when we talk about R32 coming, it's not. We want you to be aware it's not coming.
It's been.
It's perfect. So we are actually just catching up to it. So every single one of these units had R32. I talked to not a local distributor, he's in Illinois. It's probably 3 months ago. And he said, "Hey, I got a whole jug of R32 sitting over here on the shelf. It was recovered off from some units. And what do I do with it?" I said, "Well, let me hook you up with Hudson Technologies and figure out how we can get it over to them." So they already had recovered R32. That's a couple months ago. So, this is what we're seeing. We're seeing R32 already in the industry. We're going to see 454B in no time. I was already told that those are shipping out 454B jugs right now.
So these refrigerants have been in the periphery, if you will, of our industry for quite some time, in the cars, in the window units, in the refrigerators and freezers domestically for years now. Yeah. And it's now they're starting to creep into other sectors and subsectors of our industry. So exactly. While they're new to us, they are definitely not new. They've been deployed, if you will, in the wild for quite some time. Yes.
That could have been a good name. They've already been deployed to the wild. Yeah. And so we're just catching up, and we're seeing some improvements upon that, even like here in that S.N.A.P 26, exactly what you were saying. If we move, which we're going to, if we move up to 300 grams and 500 grams, depending on the design of the system, our doors and drawers or cabinets, we're now going to have up to 17.6 ounces of R290, over a pound of refrigerant, right? And R290 is a very, very good refrigerant. Right?
It's a highly flammable refrigerant.
Very highly flammable.
Point out, at these charge limits, we're used to the 150 grams or 114 residentially. Yep. At these are commercial charge limits, but we will also see on the data plate as part of this ruling a required minimum room area that this
for the
unit
installation
can be deployed into. Correct. Exactly. You can't take this unit, stuff it in a closet, and hope for the best. It'll say right on the data plate, listen, the minimum room area is XYZ, based on the charge of this system.
Exactly. Prime example, I used to have a little pizza shop, one of my favorite pizza shops to work at, Eddie's Pizza down in Nineveh, Indiana, had a little isomatic ice machine in a closet with louvered doors, right? Little water cool condenser unit sitting in a closet. That unit, if I was going to replace it in a year and a half from now, I would probably have to look at it and go, you know what? that's probably not the best candidate for an A3. I'm probably going to do a split system with R32 or whatever.
With a 2L, correct?
Yeah, with an A2L refrigerant. So we need to be aware of what those scenarios look like. And so is the equipment out there already? Mm-hmm, it is. Actually just talked to the manufacturers of the ice chests. So everyone's seen those Lear ice chests sitting outside of the gas stations, convenience stores and such. Those are all going to R290, already out there, being deployed. Every one of these pieces of equipment on this screen are already R290 highly flammable refrigerant products out in the industry right now.
I'm going to point out too that just because we're using mildly flammable A2Ls or highly flammable A3s, the refrigeration cycle is identical.
So I did our red jugs on every one of them. I don't want you to know they're different. They're not.
In the cycle, superheat is still superheat. Subcooling is subcooling. We still critically charge by weight in a lot of this. The refrigeration cycle doesn't change just because the refrigerant is flammable.
You may see a change in glide or change in pressures. And
depending on if it's a blend.
Depending on the refrigerant.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
But as far as the cooling cycle goes, the refrigeration cycle, it's identical.
Refrigeration's refrigeration. It's the beauty of it. Once you learn it, you know it. And that brings us to the end.
We made it.
Yay. Perfect timing. How about that? So let's open the floor. Anyone have any questions, things that they would like to discuss, any pieces of equipment that you want to bring up to let us know about that we haven't even covered, that you've seen out there in the wild that are getting these new A2L and A3 refrigerants?
And again, pointing out, there is what you pointed out earlier, the tools required are different. Yeah. The precautions, the layers of safety that are involved are wildly different from A2L to A3.
Exactly.
We got to stop using the F word, so to speak, flammable, because
flammable. I'll get my hand smacked for that. I can tell you all about it. We got
mildly or slightly flammable, which are our 2Ls. They're hard to ignite. And then you have the A3s that a static spark could ignite. So there's a big difference. And the tools that we use are different. The areas that we can install them are different. And the applications that we're using them in are quite different. So it's up to us as technicians, educators, teachers, whatever area of the industry you're in, to understand and know the difference between the two.
That's it. All right. I don't see any more chats coming in. Everyone out there is going, oh my gosh, I am that far behind.
We probably just gave everyone a headache, right? They're all scratching their heads saying, what did those guys just say?
Just come back next week. We'll have a little bit more.
Or watch the show again.
That's right.
It'll be on YouTube, right?
It'll be on YouTube. It'll be all over the place. Walter from Northern Idaho. We're going to do an episode on oil and retrofits. I tell you what. I should, because I'll be honest with you, here in Indiana, we don't have a lot. I had some old farms that had corn cribs that used oil heaters. I had a couple farmhouses that had oil furnaces, but I didn't work on it a lot. And just last month, I went over to the Eastern Energy Expo, and I learned myself about a lot. So we actually have a couple videos out there from looking at the different biofuels and the conversions, and how most of them actually are just running with no conversions. But if you're interested, Walter, I will make sure to reach out, because we did have a discussion with Bob O'Brien. So there's a video of Bob O'Brien. It would have been probably 7 or so back. We're at 41, so around 35, episode 35-ish, somewhere in that ballpark, where we talk about our new biofuels. But if we need to go deeper and get technical into it, I will add that onto our list. Yeah.
Awesome.
All right. Well, I think we'll wrap it up. Jason, thank you so much for hanging out, man.
Thanks for having me on, dude.
It's I'd love to see you on here more, and it's just a crazy time in the industry. And
right now, yes, there's a lot.
There's so much going on.
We need to let everybody know what's going on. We're doing our best. We're reaching out via the shows, podcasts, webcasts, emails, flyers, classes, in person, online. It's a big, tall order to fill, but we're doing our best.
Yeah, we do. All right. Well, we're glad everyone joined us, and we look forward to seeing you next week again on Did You Know, the ESCO HVAC Show. Bye. Have a good evening.